Welcome to Archive Dive. I'm Maria Lockwood, a reporter with the Superior Telegram. Each month, we dip into files on historic events, people, and places in Superior and Douglas County with local historians. Today, we'll look at how a federal program helped shape Superior. During the bleakest days of the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt created the Works Progress Administration, or WPA. The New Deal agency employed millions of job seekers with an average salary of about $41.57 a month. Through public works projects like the airport, a baseball stadium, and Itasca School, the program helped shape Superior's landscape, but it also helped preserve Superior's history. Helping us dive into the story today is local historian Teddy Meronek. Hello, Teddy.
Hi, Maria.
Thanks for joining us today.
I'm glad to be back.
Well, this is a chapter of Superior's history I don't know very much about, but it seems like it really did make an impact.
It did, and I think I'd like to start out by telling you what it was like in Superior during the Depression. The Depression started, of course, in 1929, and I just read this story in the Telegram that it was Christmas in, I believe, 1931. The city put up two signs, one at North 6th Street, they were electric signs, and one at North 16th Street. And the sign said, "Superior will have a Merry Christmas." And I thought, that's one of the saddest things I've ever read. Think how bad were things so quickly, after the stock market crash. But things were really bad in Superior. If you look through old newspapers in the late 20s, you see Superior's booming. There's all these new businesses opening up. You go and you look a couple of years later, they're all gone.
Oh, no.
It was tough times. And the WPA did not start until 1935. So there was a gap there, 4 or 5 years where it was hard for everyone. No jobs, no money. The WPA came in and things started to change. Apparently in 1935, the average unemployment rate across the United States was 20%.
Wow.
So all these people with nothing to do, and you have to find a solution. So they came up with the WPA, and it put people to work in Superior. They built things like the sewer system. They put in sidewalks. They repaved streets. They built buildings.
Are any of those buildings still standing?
Itasca School is still standing. And let me see what else is still standing.
The airport's still there.
The airport, I think that was one of their biggest projects, was the airport. They not only built the hangar, but they built the runways too.
So there was no airport in Superior prior to this?
Well, I think there was an airfield like out in Billings Park at one time.
Okay.
But this was the new airport in Superior, and that's where Dick Bong trained.
Okay.
Before he went into the war, he trained. His initial training was there at the airport, and then he moved on, I think, to California, maybe for further training, someplace else for further training, but it all started there in the WPA airport. And, there's some things that are gone now, like the Blues Stadium, which burnt down in 1961, but that was built by the WPA too. And I think they spent a lot of money on the parks in Superior because they knew people didn't have any money, but that's the one place you could go for free. You didn't need any money. And they did a substantial amount of work out at Pattison.
Oh, Pattison Park.
Believe that's when they put in the lake.
Oh,
the CCC was out there, and there
was the CCC part of the WPA.
It was a separate. It was a separate entity, but they're based on the same premise. Giving people a chance to learn how to do trades and then actually do them.
Right. And now the buildings that they built in Superior, they didn't truck in new material, right?
No, they tore down old things. There was a huge church on Cumming Avenue. It was a Methodist Episcopal church. And I think from the beginning, it probably was not well built. And I think the congregation had abandoned it. And in the 1930s, it was empty. So they tore it down and they used the materials from that building to build some of these places. And then there was the Anchor Mill on the waterfront that had been a flour mill for a very short time and had sat empty. The city bought it and it sat empty. And so they tore that down and used those materials too for these sites.
So they were recycling.
They were recycling. They were early recyclers.
Wonderful. But you mentioned that also gives more work to people, right?
Right. Because you have to tear it down and clean up all the bricks and everything and then pass them on to the construction people. And they did, I think one of the most interesting things though, myself, I think is so interesting about the WPA is how they encouraged artists and musicians and gave them employment, where a lot of people never think about those people.
Mm-hmm. They just think about the physical work,
Right.
the streets.
Right. And you need new buildings, and that's something the entire community is going to use. But they had the WPA band. They hired these guys, and they practiced from 9 to 3, 5 days a week at the Moose Lodge. And then they had 3 different bands. They had a band, and then they had, like, they called it an old-time orchestra, to play old-time music. Mm-hmm. And then they had a jazz orchestra. And then they played for events in town. And I don't know if they could be hired by someone to play, but they played for all kinds of events. They gave a concert at the Children's Home, the St. Joseph's Children's Home, and played for the kids there. But one of their members was Frankie Cox.
Oh, Frankie Cox.
Frankie Cox, who played at Tony's for years, probably Superior's best-known musician was Frankie Cox. He worked for the WPA band during the Depression.
Was he with the jazz band?
I don't know. There's another thing I'll have to look into, right? I imagine he was. They got paid $94 a month.
Oh, wow.
But when you think of how many hours they had to put in, not only did they have to practice, but then they had to perform too.
Right.
I kind of figured it out yesterday. It was about $1 an hour, less than $1 an hour, which I suppose was about standard pay for WPA.
Were they large orchestras?
Yeah,
large
it was
bands?
pretty.
Do you know how many?
No, I can't
musicians?
remember, but it was a big group. And then there were a lot of people who did artwork, especially at the university. There's a great book of woodcuts that the students at the university did, and they're of various sites around Douglas County and Superior. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple murals. I know the Douglas County Historical Society has one mural, and then I thought that UWS had one in the library. I'm not too sure if it's there anymore, because, all those materials do not belong to the community. The feds can come and get them anytime they want. Yes.
Oh, no.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it was federal funds.
It was federal funds, so they ultimately own them.
They're not going to repo our airport, are they?
I don't think so.
Or Itasca School, which is now Itasca Apartments, right?
I don't know. They used to be Twin Ports Baptist was out there. I don't know if they still are
they
or
are.
not.
You're right. Okay, so it's the Twin Ports Baptist building. That was Itasca School.
Yeah.
Was that an elementary school?
It was an elementary school, very small, but I think they got the money for it because it was not only a school, but it was a community center.
Oh, okay.
So the community could use it for meetings and things like that. The WPA also built the old vocational school, which was on Belknap. It's at where the post office sits right now. Oh. And that was built by the WPA. It served 1,000 students. That was its capacity. And of course taught, manual arts and secretarial things and all of that. And they also had a greenhouse on the roof.
I have read stories about that greenhouse, and they have pictures from the papers, but they were always black and white, so I could never imagine what it would look like.
So they had that. But I think they really concentrated on the playgrounds and the parks in Superior. And they gave a lot of money. A lot of money was spent, it's not surprising, on Billings Park. It's a beautiful park. They did pathways, many pathways there. They built a building that I think housed probably restrooms and changing rooms in that, and fire pits.
Right, because that was a public beach at one point, right? That was people would go and swim off of Billings Point.
Right,
Park Point
and
there.
they had a diving platform out there.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that was in use for a long time, but then I think it eventually was too polluted for swimming out there. So they did all of those things. And
are those the paths that are there today? But I mean, they've been repaved?
Probably, I would think.
Did they do the work on the hill to make the...
I didn't read about that, but I think there's that outside fire pit that it was a Boy Scout Point. I've heard it called
Girl Scout Point.
Girl Scout Point, yeah.
They put that in?
That was the WPA thing, yeah. They published this little booklet, WPA Projects in Superior, and it has pictures of all the things that they did, and that's one of them in there.
Awesome.
Along with, the other big projects like, well, the unglamorous ones like putting down sidewalks and, sewer pipes and all of that stuff. They really did a lot of infrastructure work here. They built, I don't know how many bridges it was. It was just amazing. They built 3 bridges in Billings Park, like, rustic bridges, not the
like
Blotnick Bridge. No. And then at the playgrounds, they would offer all these events for kids. They had a hopscotch contest. They had, what else did they have? They would have a big event every year. It was called Wheel Day. And they would have a parade, and kids could bring in anything with wheels on it, a wheelbarrow,
Okay.
a bicycle, a doll buggy, a lawnmower that had wheels on it. You could decorate it and be in this parade, and they would, give prizes for it. And they also held, which I think is one of the funniest thing, a freckle contest.
Freckle contest?
Yes. And so they'd pick the girl and the boy who had the most freckles on their faces, and they got to be king and queen of the wheel day parade.
Oh, fun.
And they did a lot of things with kids at the playground to keep them busy. And Joe Lasinski, who was the head of the recreation department, that was his title, he encouraged parents to send their kids to the playground instead of letting them play on vacant lots and in the streets.
Well, that's good advice.
Yes. So I guess most everybody took his advice, and that's what they did.
You mentioned you remember seeing sidewalks with the WPA on them.
Right.
What areas of town did you see that in?
It must have been East End. But they did sidewalks. They did Tower Avenue sidewalks. That was one of their biggest projects, was the Tower Avenue sidewalks.
Okay.
And I don't know if the Historical Society, when they were pulling out the old sidewalks, because they make them handicapped accessible now, so people can get into the streets, and they were usually at the curb is where they put the WPA sidewalk or put their initials in there. I think that the Historical Society, I don't know if they still have it, but may have gotten one of those.
Oh.
Because they're rare. You can still see sidewalks in Superior that have the old names of the streets in East End. You see those once in a while, but those are fast disappearing too, although they held up really well.
Well, they did a good job.
Yeah, they did a good job, yeah.
Do you know how many people in Superior and Douglas County were employed through the WPA?
I don't know. But they did do work throughout the county too.
Anything out in the county that folks would know offhand?
I think the CCC did an amazing amount of work, like around Brule. And
they did have a big camp in Brule in that area, but that was prior to the WPA, because I know we've been following 1933 right now with our Douglas County past.
The CCC may have come into existence ahead of the WPA, I suppose. And they did a lot of work out at Pattison too. But the WPA also did work out at Pattison, but the CCC did too, because they built the main lodge.
Right.
That was a CCC.
And all of these were programs intended to not only help infrastructure, but get people back to work.
Right. And they were really sad times. I mean, I don't think we can even imagine what it was like back then. So many people out of work. In fact, when my parents got married during the Great Depression, my dad luckily had a job. But there were lots of people who were at their wedding that didn't have a job. So several of them went on the honeymoon with my mom and dad.
Where did your mom and dad go for a honeymoon?
I believe they just went out to, my great aunt and uncle had a place in Webster, Wisconsin, and I think that's where they went, if I remember the story. But, there were people, my dad's brother went with them, and my mom's sister, and, he didn't have a job. It's just how things were in those days.
That would be kind of a crowded honeymoon.
It would be, but yeah. I remember my mother telling me that story, and I'm thinking, well, that doesn't sound really romantic.
No. Were they able to have a traditional wedding? Did they the white dress and everything?
Yes.
Were there rations? Were there
No,
in
fact, my mother bought the material for her wedding dress. She had a seamstress make it, and she bought it at Roth Brothers.
Roth Brothers. So they were here through the Great Depression.
Yes, they were. And luckily, my dad always had a job, so that was a good thing, but lots of people didn't.
Right. And you said a lot of the businesses did go under.
Yeah.
Why did Roth Brothers not?
Well, I suppose he was a wise person. But, I think it was more of the businesses who may have been like specialty shops, maybe the jewelers and maybe some clothing stores that, that's all they sold, or women's fashions or something like that. Those were the things that were probably, and they didn't have a long history either.
Right. They hadn't established themselves enough yet.
The 1920s, that was boom times, It's like before the whole crash of the stock market after the whole technology thing. So, it was boom times, and everybody was speculating. Well, it was even, as we talked in the past about the Android. You get into the 1930s and the Android's struggling. This is a brand new hotel, and they're struggling to make their payments on their loans because of the Depression, because nobody's traveling, nobody's going to hotels because they can't afford it anymore.
Was there an uptick in people having gardens, growing food locally?
Well, one thing I did read about that is that the Red Cross helped the WPA, and they came to town one summer, and any excess vegetables that were at I guess they had like an outdoor market here, and vegetables that came from different sources. They got groups of women together to can all of these vegetables and give them to families who were struggling financially and didn't have enough money for food. So,
that's wonderful.
Yeah, the women did a lot of things, to try to help people, whether it was planting gardens or canning food or whatever. But they mostly concentrated on finding employment for men because they were the breadwinners of a family usually. So they're the ones that needed the jobs the most.
Right. We mentioned in another podcast about how some of the schools dealt with the Great Depression. Was the college here at the time?
Yes,
and
it was.
Did that weather well?
That's a good question. I just mentioned to you that most of the students at the college at that time were girls. I imagine even then they were still the majority of students. And as it got closer to World War II, there were no men there. So I don't know. I imagine most families who had kids who were in school probably pulled them out, even of high school, so they could go find some kind of work to help support the families.
Wow.
It was not a fun time. And Superior really, the worst thing I think about this is if you were employed by the city of Superior because you did not get paid. They had no money. Superior had no cash for years. No cash. So
how did they have employees? How did you pay your policemen? How did you pay your firefighters?
You paid them in scrip, which was fake money.
Okay.
That when the city eventually had real money, it could be exchanged for that. But if you were an employee and you were paid in scrip, you could not spend that money any other place but Superior, Wisconsin.
Oh.
That was it. But, in those days, people did usually do most of their shopping in Superior. They didn't go to Duluth. But that's what you could do. And in fact, we were speaking of Edith Carlson earlier, who had been a librarian at the Superior Public Library. The librarians suffered greatly because they not only, sometimes didn't get paid, they had to take 6 weeks off during the year, unpaid. And eventually, I think there was maybe a state law in effect that said you had to pay city employees after so much time. If they hadn't been paid, you had to pay them. The city of Superior had to borrow money from the Board of Education to meet that requirement of paying the city employees.
So the city wasn't making money.
The city wasn't because, they weren't making tax money. And they were waiting for big tax payments from bigger industries before they could pay their bills and pay their employees. So no one was safe from it.
Wow.
But things picked up.
Right. And now this was an 8-year program.
Yeah.
Towards the end, did it start to slow down?
Well, if you look through the newspapers, you see, starting in the early 1940s, even though we were an isolationist country, we were not going to get involved in another war in Europe. We were. And everybody knew that. So the WPA was now training people with skills to work in like the businesses that would support the war effort, shipyards, airplane factories. They were doing that. So about 1941, they kind of switched to that. The program ended in 43. By that time, the unemployment rate was down to 2%, from 20 to 2%.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So things picked up fast. And you often wonder, well, if there hadn't been a war, how long would it have gone on? I don't know.
That's a question we didn't have to answer.
Yeah. So it was tough times in Superior.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. I don't know how Duluth fared. I've never looked into that. I imagine they suffered the same way we did. They had that big new Hotel Duluth.
Yeah, but the Android's still there.
So. Yeah, I know. Going to be 100 years old too. So, but yeah, you got to give credit to people who made it through there, and the generosity of people who, I'm sure there were a lot of grocers who carried people on their books for a long time because they couldn't pay for food. You've got to just think how lucky you are. You didn't have to live through that. And I really don't think there will ever, ever, ever be a generation. They deserve the title, the greatest generation, because not only did they survive World War II, they survived the Great Depression.
Right on the heels of each other.
Yeah. So what's your youth is taken away from you during these two things. Well, East High School couldn't afford to publish a yearbook, couldn't afford to publish a newspaper. There just weren't the funds to do any of that. Tough times.
Tough times.
Yeah.
But Superior, you can look around Superior today and see traces of that time and the projects that were
Right.
built
You
during
know,
it.
there's still things standing like in Webster Park. That pergola, that's still standing there, isn't the little
Mhm.
building? That was built by WPA and actually designed by a rather well-known Superior architect, John Bach, who did the Nottingham apartments.
Oh, those are lovely.
Yeah, so he did that, but they used to have wading pools. Both Kelly Park and Webster Park
Really?
had wading pools, but I imagine the liability. They weren't very deep, but still, we have got little kids there.
Mhm.
And they also, Superior also spent a lot of money on winter sports and activities. They built ski jumps,
Oh.
they built toboggan runs all over town. You know,
Really?
Kelly Park had this huge slide that you could go down on your, I suppose in the winter, you could go down on your, I don't know, sled. I don't think they had sleds, but they had a huge slide there, and they did out on the Nemadji too. They would have jumps and toboggan runs and things, but they spent so much money, and they would sponsor contests every year, ski jumping contests and all of that. They had one in Billings Park. I know Nebagamon had a ski jump too. So all over the county, but people could do it for free. If you had a pair of skis, you could do that stuff, or a toboggan. You could go out there and spend the day.
Cool. They didn't make the fountain that's at Hammond Park, did they?
No, that was
That predates the
yeah, that was
WPA.
donated by the Hammond family.
Okay.
Yeah, they paid for that. No, the playgrounds, they were really emphasizing the playgrounds too, that it was a good place for kids to go, you know, have your freckles counted.
Right. And that carries through to today, where
Right,
there's still
right.
a lot of emphasis on the parks and the outdoor spaces
Yeah.
here in Superior.
Yeah, because what have you got, like 2 months of summer and then the rest is winter? So you really emphasize the winter sports too, that, you know, you get kids involved, and, you know, you have baseball teams, and they did so many things with these kids. It's amazing. All the schools, you know, they would have activities all the time for kids. And I suppose they were worried, and what was going on at home too, you know, and tough times for your families. It's an interesting part of Superior's history. And it was like the city in some ways made sure, like when they built an addition on Central High School, that they made sure, although it wasn't a WPA project, they made sure that the company they hired employed local people. And they paid them more because, you know, of the times. And that happened time after time, where, you know, companies would insist, we're going to hire local people, and there's not going to be any argument about that, because these are the people that we live with, and they need these jobs.
Right. So really, it was a time for folks to come together.
Yeah. And, you know, they learned a lot of things from and the WPA sponsored things like toy lending libraries.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And they employed people to fix up old toys. And in fact, they had a workspace out in South Superior in the old Stokely canning factory, which was part of Webster Chair.
Oh.
They fixed the toys, painted them up, take them. One of the lending places was the East End Library. They'd lend them out to kids. You had to be at least 2 years old and promise to bring them back on time before you could take them out.
Awesome.
So,
just, yeah, it's a neat era of the city history there.
Right, and how people survive tough times.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's wonderful. And thanks for listening to Archive Dive. New episodes are available monthly at superiortelegram.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, email me at mlockwood@superiortelegram.com.